Okay, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome from IACC to today's webinar, looking at MultiPOD explained to meeting professionals. A few housekeeping points before we start. We have put you all on mute due to the number on the call, so we encourage you all to use your chat boxes, which you'll find at the bottom of your screens for any questions. That will be monitored throughout the session, and the questions will be put forward to our panel. Today's session is recorded, so I will forward the recording to you all following the webinar, but it is also available on our webinar on demand page on our website and also the IACC YouTube channel. Please welcome now our facilitator today, IACC CEO, Mark Cooper. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you very much, Kate, and hello everyone. Welcome to IACC's Guide to MultiPOD, the every answer to every question we could come up with related to how we can create a multi-location virtual live business event anywhere in the world. And I am looking forward to introducing our expert panel that will help us answer some of those critical questions. Today, our session is all about the world as we look at it from the perspective of a meeting professional. On Tuesday this week, we had a similar session, which we welcomed our venue hosts and our venue operators onto that session. We had a great session, and again, we covered some wonderful ground. But let me start by talking to you a little bit about the inspiration that really brought us to where we are today and where the multi-location, MultiPOD concept came from. And to do this, what I'd like to use is a real-life case study from a professional association that represented the advertising industry, and one of those early conversations that I had with the meeting professional that unfortunately had that challenging situation where their event in Singapore this April had to be cancelled for the COVID reasons. And then they looked to a situation where they needed to postpone until next April. Excuse me, a slight cold, so hopefully that won't just interrupt us too much. So they had to cancel their event. They were looking to postpone until next April, but around August, September time this year, that meeting professional realized that still there was no opportunity to bring 600 of their attendees around the world to Singapore, or indeed to any single location around the world. So they moved very quickly. And one of the opportunities that was born out of this was they needed to meet collectively as a global group. So instead of all going to one location, they are looking at 3 locations: Toronto, Brussels or Amsterdam, and then Singapore. And from that, there's a question of how do you run an event, a single business event over several locations, but with that unity and that interconnectivity that really makes every attendee feel like they are part of it. And that is the approach that inspired MultiPOD, and that is the approach that will inspire all of our conversations today. As Kate mentioned, we've got a great panel that will be here to answer questions that you share via the chat box, and Kate will highlight those as we run through, and we will leave some time at the end of the hour to be able to cover them as well. But first, I think it's important for us to explore what IACC is as an organisation, just so that we can appreciate that in the context of what MultiPOD is about and the type of venues that we will be using. So as an association, IACC has been around since 1981 and really is a collection of over 400 venues that meet a very specific goal. We're located across 4 different continents of the world. They are properties that are part of individual conference and meeting venues, resort hotels, urban day centres, lots of very different types of venue, but with one common thread. They represent the top 1% of business events and meetings focused venues globally. These venues are ones where the meeting rooms are created for the purposes of meetings and nothing else. They're not multi-purpose rooms. They have extensive audio-visual, AV teams, operational teams, and marketing teams in place that primarily focus on business events and conferences. And the average group size is under 200 delegates. And when we look to these solutions, albeit that we'll be considering events in the same type of ballpark, anything from 2 to 200, of course, the premise of MultiPOD can live on in other events of larger numbers. And the last point that I'll make is not only do these represent the top business event venues out there, so you can have full confidence in the quality of the service they provide, but every IAC member venue around the world meets a global set of quality criteria. They're committed to brilliance. They follow many levels of philosophy in regards to delivering an exceptional meetings experience. So every venue is certified by IAC to make sure it hits that top 1%. Now, I said to you I'd got a special lineup of professionals here today, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Eric Brack, Senior Consultant for AV Operations from Electromedia Design. Welcome, Eric. And then I would like to introduce Matt Harvey, Vice President of Virtual and Hybrid Events for PSAV. And what Matt does not know when it comes to hybrid events and virtual events really is not worth knowing. As you know, PSAV is the largest provider of production and technical and audiovisual expertise for live business events worldwide. So Matt, welcome, and thank you for being a part of the design team along with Eric and others that has really helped us develop and create the science behind MultiPOD. Then I would like to welcome Edward Vastag. Edward is Director of Technology at Vantage Venues in Toronto in Canada. And Edward and Vantage Venues, again, are a great example of a member venue that has really been working very hard across a multitude of different platforms with their clients. Everything from live recording event studios, which Edward will be touching on a little later in the session, to hybrid events, to virtual events, and using the traditional environment of a conference and meeting venue with a vastly superior set of IT and technological solutions. They have been able to be a really close support to meeting professionals in the centre of Toronto. So welcome, Edward.
Thank you, Mark.
And then I would like to welcome my colleague and co-director on IAC America's board, Tim Lukey, General Manager for Sodexo Conferencing, who represent a huge number of conference venues. Tim was instrumental in our production team for our own annual conference that should have been running in March this year in Dallas, Texas, and instead, just 8 weeks later, went 100% virtual, and we quadrupled our attendance over our 4-day session there. And Tim, ever since that point, along with his property team and Sodexo conferencing team, have been providing hybrid and virtual solutions for their clients throughout the summer. Tim, welcome. So in a moment, we're going to be talking through, and I'm going to be addressing our panel with some key questions around this whole concept of MultiPOD, but also hybrid and virtual are a part of it. But to begin with, what I'd like to do is give you the 30,000-foot introduction to IAC MultiPOD meetings. So you heard from the example that I gave to you of that meeting professional who had that challenge in Singapore and how they were going to get their group together, but not all together in the same room or even the same venue or even the same country. MultiPOD is a very, very simple concept. It is one where we interconnect with various different approaches to achieve that single event feel, but with still the critical element that there are more than one live business events. And we'll hear some of those differences there. There are many layers to an IAC MultiPOD. Technology is one. You'll hear about that in great detail. Collaboration between venues, when you've got multiple venues at play, you'll hear what's important about that from Tim and from Edward. Then you'll be looking at, as well, we'll be touching on some of the facilitation and content techniques that are critical. Again, it's like a web. We're interweaving these groups, and we're creating an environment where there are aha points within the session, within the conference, where people get that feeling that there is unity going on between them, even though they can't see their colleagues. And then we're also going to be looking at what are some of the physical aspects of a meeting environment that are critical to this type of event working really well. Now, I mentioned to you a little bit about the IACC venues around the world, and not only do they have to meet a criteria to be within an IACC portfolio, but they've also had to step up and provide a pledge of conformity, of eligibility to be a host pod venue. So although you're going to be learning about what some of those venue aspects need to be a good pod location for a multi-location event, you can also sit back and just enjoy the ride, because they will already have conformed to this pledge and those standards as part of IACC, if IACC is to put them forward as a suitable venue for a pod event. But you can view all of this online, and there is a lot of detail there. So what I'd like to do now is move on. I'm going to actually turn off my video screen just so that I can focus on grilling our panel today. But then we're going to head into our first question. And that first question really is to Matt from PSAV. You know, Matt, what is the difference technology-wise to a hybrid meeting and this multi-pod approach? I mean, surely it's just, you know, a hybrid meeting with people attending from literally anywhere in the world, isn't it?
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and great to be with everybody this afternoon, depending on where you're calling in from. I thought the best way of answering this question would be to draw a couple of diagrams here. You know, this is how hybrid is being talked about through most of the industry at the moment. The idea of a single live audience with a virtual audience tacked on. And, you know, quite frankly, we think that's a narrow definition of hybrid. And that's why I'm so excited to be part of the IACC initiative around MultiPOD. And if we skip forward a slide, you'll see the difference quite quickly. MultiPOD is about enabling multiple live audiences to talk to each other and engage with each other if that's what's needed, as well as having a virtual audience if that's what is needed, as well as bringing in presenters from multiple places as well. So it creates an ecosystem of much greater flexibility to achieve a planner's goals, you know, depending on the outcomes desired. So yeah, looking forward to sharing more about this technology a bit later on, Mark.
Thank you, Matt. And even for those that are not yet considering that it's part of their portfolio of events over the next year or two, that they'll be running a multi-location event, this is still going to be a great webinar, because as you mentioned, that virtual attendance, that hybrid approach, it is all a part of MultiPOD, or it can separately be that. And I know you're all going to be touching on that. So I appreciate that, Matt. Thank you very much for that intro. Now, I'm going to move on to Tim, if I can now. Tim from Sodexo, venue operator, been immersed in this with your clients, both virtual production, but also on the ground with your property teams. Matt's given us a little bit of a brief intro into the tech and the AV side, which we now, you know, understand a little bit better. But if I'm going to put myself in the shoes of everyone else on this session today, the meeting organizer who's used to having a single event, whether that's for 100 or 1,000 people, it doesn't really matter. One event is one event. We know all the work that goes into it. But you know, if we're now considering staging this over, say, 3 or 5 locations for smaller groups, how can we avoid it feeling like it's 3 times the work to plan and run the event because it's over 3 locations or more? What's important for this to not, you know, turn us grey very quickly?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think as we look at the multi-pod approach, it's just elevating the experience to a new level. So as we look at the key elements and differentiators in this multi-pod approach, we can really look at some of the key takeaways for it. So the first one is single production tech support. So really looking at it as a unified area where we can come together as as technicians and really collaborate amongst the different venues. So if you have 3 venues, if you're an association and you're trying to do an event in 3 different locations, is to have a stake in the ground with a technician that can really be a visionary for that support. And then secondly, is shared planning meetings. So really, as you do this multi-pod approach, it's really taking into account more of a unified approach with the planning meeting. So bringing in all the venues, really collaborating with the technology and the vision, and really the story that you want to tell for your event is really important. And then another key aspect is, the next slide, please, is.
Of course, and if I can, Tim, just as you gave that introduction, I mean, it is very different. It's not often that AV production, venue teams, and the meeting organizer all come together in one room, even before. So that's a really good point that you make there, that this requires a different approach from an understanding perspective between all of those key parties.
Correct, yeah. And it's really just sharing that information and having that collaboration, so that there's an efficiency of what is the vision for the event that you're trying to put on, and having the folks that know the technology, that know how to make the experience come to life in those different areas. And now with the current state of affairs, being in different cities, to really make it feel like it looks like it's a larger event, but really bring it into more of a smaller scale. And that's where the sharing of information and bringing it into more of a unified approach will make it feel like less work for the meeting planner at hand. The next slide, please. And so really, what is it to reimagine what it looks like at these locations, to really forget about what we did in 2019 and really think forward of like, what kind of innovations, what can we bring into this new event with the multi-pod? How can we make it feel like, even though there's 3 different locations across the country, how can we make the story come to life and make it a unified approach that makes it feel like the attendees in each of those locations feel like they're at the same event? So really just having curiosity of your attendees and really what it looks like to make it come to life is going to be really important. And the last one here is to really create a single experience feel. So this could be maybe props that are similar feel, so that the brand of your event really shines. It could be room layout, maybe a cohesive room layout. Maybe it could be a similar food and beverage delivery in each of the locations is really important as you think about a multi-pod approach, so that all the attendees across all the different locations feel like they're at the same event. And then really just taking an aerial view of this approach is really your vision, and your digital event strategy will be defined as a success, and how you manage governance. And that's why having IAC as an approach to this multi-pod approach is really important, as you think about like having partners like PSAV or national technology partners, and really best connected cross-venue solutions that IAC has across the world. To have that as an importance to really drive a unified approach for this, because you really want to have that assurance and the mechanisms and the synergy as you look at this multi-pod approach. So governance is really important. And then secondly, the people and the processes. So someone like Edward, who's really a specialized person in this hybrid event, and Matt, like where they can really come together and give you the vision and the technical competence to really make this come to life. And so that's really important to have a streamlined process and the people who are going to deliver that for you. And then lastly, the technologies. You know, there's all kinds of platforms out there, but really you want to take a step back and really look about what's your vision and what is your why? Like, why are you wanting this event, and what is the outcome of it is really more important than the platform itself, and getting the right people and the right partners involved to really make this come to life for you. So that's where I would encourage you all to look for before you're getting overwhelmed with 80 different platforms that all do something quite different. You want to take a step back and look at it from an aerial view, and that'll really help you and support you moving forward.
But Tim, that's going to be a really nice segue. And Matt, I know, is going to be getting into a lot more of that detail, including the platforms and the approach that you take to it and the size and the numbers. But what I'd like to do is just take a moment, because you made some really important points in terms of the role that each has, both in terms of the unifying across the different venues and also, you know, how that happens. And maybe I'll use the opportunity to talk about what we're not talking about as well. So to give an example, any of the venues within a pod can be from any group or from any individual portfolio. So we're not talking here about a solution that would need to use one brand with several properties in different locations. They really just have to have that spirit of collaboration. What we're not talking about is single contracting of multiple venues, for the reason that I've just highlighted, that they are all individual venues. So this isn't a contracting question, but it's more a deep understanding that in the planning stage, all of the stakeholders know that the process for planning, for rehearsing and for staging the event is going to require that sharing of information, that collaboration, that willingness. Even, you know, in an example, you mentioned food and beverage. If it's an event where you are going to be over different time zones, but it's enough where everybody is going to be having lunch at the event, albeit maybe at slightly different times, then have the same menu. Be able to have your MC speaker at the end reference during the day. Wasn't that a great lunch that we had? Small things that all of a sudden people in their brains say, we're actually going through the same experience. And I think we will get even more creative when we look to that in the future. So now I'd like to move on. Matt, let's start to consider maybe the differences, because you've spoken to me often about large and small events, and, you know, does it make any difference? Does it have any influence on whether we've got 3 people in each of the 5 pod locations, 30 people or 300 people in there? You know, can you talk us through some of those and, you know, and help us understand the differences in regards to event size, but also, again, looking at those different event types as well?
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. So, you know, of course, like Tim said, everything starts with the goals of the meeting and the anticipated attendee outcomes. And, you know, maybe that's heavy on educating, collaborating, motivating, networking, like all those things that we you know, use events for. And, you know, as we talk through and as we think through those goals, as technologists, we're looking to answer 2 questions, 2 key question areas. The first one is the video interaction, the live video, and that, you know, not just the you know, the Zoom piece, but also potentially, you know, video graphics and switching, and, you know, how we bring video feeds together and live and playback and all those kinds of things. And we kind of bundle up that capability and we call it production. So like, how will the video production work? And then secondly, what if any attendee engagement platform is needed in addition? So just skip back 1 slide, Mark. I just want to say one more thing about this. One more. You know, in this example, you know, focusing on the video production for a second. In this example, this is quite a simple version of how video production might go. We've got a presenter at one location, which is delivering a message outbound to everybody else who's watching, sort of one-way video. And this might be a great way to handle multi-pod if your goal is to have a single common message delivered by one leader at the beginning of the day, and then spend the rest of the day in those pod locations collaborating in person around the message that was delivered in the morning. Let's move ahead and look at a slightly more complicated version of the technology. This would be 2-way video, but only looking at the presenters, right? So we don't yet see live audience shots in different places here, but this would allow for something like a panel discussion where one live presenter was talking to a live presenter in multiple other places, and they came together onto a virtual stage to have a discussion at the beginning of the day before, you know, a more collaborative afternoon in pod locations. And then finally, the last diagram I'm going to show you today is kind of live, full two-way video. Everybody sees everybody. Gets very complicated quite quickly depending on audience size, but very, very interactive if it's done correctly. So that's a little bit of a buildup of how we think about production and what's needed in different situations. The other thing I mentioned that we're all thinking about as we work through goals is the engagement platform. And the engagement platform, there's a bunch of tools out there now. This is ours. We call it Chime. And this allows, remote attendees to collaborate without needing direct video interfaces with each other, potentially via chat, via polling, via word clouds or heat maps. And this can help overcome some of the, this can help, help keep the meeting on track, obviously from an agenda perspective, but it also can overcome some of the challenges of being remote. So for example, even if we went with a one-way video presenter type option on the production side, you can still use an engagement platform like Chime to get an incredibly useful amount of audience feedback in real time without having to see everybody's faces at, at the other end. So the balance of production and platform together, is what we're thinking about as we look to design the right type of multi-pod experience for you.
Matt, it's interesting, just to pick up on that point, it's interesting because one of the first questions I'm often asked by meeting organizers is, what platform do you use? And if you think about that for all the reasons that you've said in the variations, think about that in relation to when we work with a production company at a live event as a meeting organizer, I'm not interested what platform or what software the production crew are using. I just want my conference to work. And this comes back to the heart of what, the importance of meeting event design. When we talk about the architecture, what sort of collaboration do we want? Tim talked about it earlier. What collaboration do we want between the attendees or not want between the attendees, and how do we get that? How does technology help us do that? And then the platform solution is that varied approach, and the different ones that, as you've said, provide different solutions. So almost it should be for a meeting organizer, the last or the question we never ask is having the confidence in the people that will put that infrastructure, that architecture together after they've asked the organizer the right question. And you showed us the different approaches, the one-way, the two-way interaction. They're the really critical questions to ask. The platform will follow afterwards.
Yeah,
Matt,
absolutely.
I've just got a question come in from our audience regarding Chime. Is it run from a laptop by the organizer or by remotes?
Chime is a cloud-based product. It started its life as an on-site product that ran from a laptop at the back of a room. We've since evolved it into a cloud-based product, so it can be run from anywhere. It is also a full-service product, so it comes with project management and operators, so that you get the most out of the product. Like I said, that's our approach. There are plenty of other options in that platform space, and just to reiterate something that Mark said, there are the balancing act between production and platform is based on the goals and the outcomes that you expect for the event. And there are incredibly complex platforms. There are incredibly simple platforms, and it's important to pick the right one based on the goals of the event. The other thing that's worth mentioning at this point, and probably most planners that have tried to plan a hybrid or a virtual event will have experienced in the last few months, is the shift in when the work effort happens around platforms. So platforms take time to design, to implement, to create, to run the graphics, to set up, and to get the most out of them. It's really important to put that time in prior to go live, so that platform does exactly what you need it to in terms of engagement on the day. And that sort of produces this work period of, we think in terms of 6 weeks prior to the event, where you should have, got to a point where you're fairly confident in what the event's going to look like. And we start talking about how you want that engagement environment to look and feel.
Great, thank you, Matt. And in terms of the platform journey, I'll open this out to both you and Edward, because Edward, you've been a part of these journeys with your clients now, Advantage as a venue. Very different approach, right, to the way that you used to support meeting professionals, bringing their event to Toronto. But is there any golden nuggets in terms of, you know, the importance of this? Or there are eight elements here of the journey, the platform journey. Anything that either of you can share in terms of a focus on this area and you won't go wrong, or be careful that if you underplay your hand here, that you could have issues?
Matt, did you want to go first, or?
You know, I like I said, I just, you know, give yourself time to plan, and, you know, give yourself the space to understand. And, you know, it's interesting that, you know, questions that we used to, rehearsals are a great example, right? I love this example, right? Most of the time, if you're doing a live event, you can be pretty sure that all of your presenters are going to be in the bar the night before the meeting starts. So we know where to find our presenters the night before an event starts. Well, that's not true anymore in a multi-pod event. And if you're going to do rehearsals, it's something that needs to be planned for in enough time that we can reserve the same time slot for all the same, you know, for all the presenters all over the world, that could, you know, to be available at the same time. So, you know, very quickly in this process, we realized that, you know, rehearsals was something that we needed to schedule 5 weeks out from the event to make sure that we had enough, you know, enough time to get on everyone's schedules at the same time. It's just an interesting difference between, you know, in-person events where we knew where everybody was going to be at a certain time and we took it for granted, and, you know, now moving into this world where we have to plan for those types of things. So that's one example, and there are many others.
It's a good one though, you know, because the risk is if we use the bandwidth, the amount of time we used to give to our traditional production or planning stages for a conference, we try to apply the same bandwidth to each of them, we're probably going to come unstuck. There's going to be areas where we've got cost savings, and other areas where, you know, rehearsing and, you know, all those elements, we need to put more time into those to make it really smooth. We got one or two tech questions coming out now, so if you don't mind, we're going to hit you with a couple of those as they've come through. Let me just pick one or two up here. How much bandwidth is needed at each site to make multi-pod events work? And in the same context, what other technology apart from the platform, if any, is needed? Eric, if I may, I'm going to open up to you on that first question, because your role is designing meeting conference venue spaces in this order, and then maybe Matt as well from an evaluation from PSAV's perspective. Any thoughts on that?
Well, what I would say is the amount of bandwidth needed is it's a variable depending on the meeting design. You know, what are the needs of the meeting? Or is it strictly a one-way broadcast? Is it two ways? Is it one camera? Is it three cameras? Will there be, you know, is polling and audience response and apps and those kind of things, are they important to the meeting? So what, you know, when it comes to bandwidth, there's some really good resources on the IACC page, and I would encourage everybody to go take a look there. There's been a lot of work done around that. Rather than just rattling off some numbers here, there's some pretty, you know, specific information relating to some of those needs right on the page. So it'd be a great place to go look and get that get that question answered. I would, you know, the couple things we say is that, you know, when you're doing these meetings, we always want to try to rely on a wired, dedicated amount of bandwidth. You know, don't think you're going to do these meetings with the, you know, the public Wi-Fi that's available in the facilities. It's going to take some dedicated bandwidth that you want to test and make sure that you've got a synchronous connection, both upload and download, so that if that's what the meeting needs.
Thank you, Eric. Matt, would you disagree with any of that, or?
No, just to add to it a little bit. You know, I think one thing that, you know, just to reassure the planners on the call potentially is, like, this does not take more bandwidth than we expect venues to already have. So, you know, I think you're going to find that the IAC venues that we're talking about have the amount of bandwidth that you need to do this stuff. The other thing that's worth thinking about around the internet connectivity, especially, is redundancy. So redundancy is sort of having a secondary connection to the internet in case the first one goes out. You know, and I know everyone, you know, it's bad enough when internet goes down at an event when everyone is in the same room, but you know, if you're trying to hold an event across multiple cities and that, you know, internet connection is your lifeline to the outside world and to be able to collaborate and, you know, move through the meeting in the appropriate time frame, then considering backup bandwidth connectivity options is also a useful idea. And I know Ed and I have talked before about how to do that on a sort of temporary basis, as you know, it doesn't necessarily follow that the venue has to have that redundant connectivity all the time. It can be brought in if that's something which is helpful, again, for not a tremendously large amount of money.
Great, thank you. This is a question, last question, that I think any one of you could pick up and give a different viewpoint on. But DFIT asking the question: is there any specific broadcast quality, cameras, speakers, microphone devices, I guess any hardware required for the presenters, or is it agnostic to the platform? And I guess that is a comparison against what might have been brought into live business events that are not having to broadcast outside of the room. Who'd like to pick that one up?
Well, maybe I'll speak to the platform aspect. The AV gear, including, you know, cameras and mics being the most important in this type of environment, are agnostic to the platform. And I'm sure Eric will have lots to say about the quality of cameras and mics, so I'll probably let him answer that bit.
Well, there's obviously a varying quality on the microphones and the cameras that you can use. They start with webcam systems. Yeah, thank you. I was about to say that there are some cameras that you can get, like this product from Owl Labs, that do a nice job in smaller meetings of being able to capture a group of people. It's a 360 type of camera. Obviously, we're talking about smaller groups here than what we might be thinking about multi-pods. There's things like the Mevo camera there that's still high definition and you can control it with your smartphone. Then you go up to, you know, HD, DV cams, those kind of things. And you start to get into the area where you'd want a professional to set it up and get it ready. And it might be more temporary than it is a permanent fixture in a room. But again, I hate to keep saying it depends, but a lot of it depends on what the needs of the meeting are and how that meeting is going to work and what the design is, whether it's a straight lecture or it's a collaborative session where you're going to need to look at a lot of people.
No, that's great. Matt, Eric, thank you for looking at that and running through that with us. So you talked a little bit about the process in regards to the different stages of planning a multi-pod or a hybrid or a virtual meeting. Doesn't really matter what it is, and it's very different. Here we're looking more at the team roles, and we're building this picture of the points of difference here. But again, I think Matt, Eric, or Edward, I'm more than happy to throw out any points that you'd like to make in relation to some of these different responsibilities and how we approach these with a different mindset.
Yeah, I think, you know, what we've learned, Mark, from 9 months of doing this is that timing is obviously critical to keep everybody in sync, especially if you're trying to drive that shared experience across multiple venues. So some of these roles become really important that you wouldn't necessarily think of as needing to have it if you were all together in the same place. So, maybe I'll pick out just a couple of them here. I know we're pressed for time here, but the virtual event producer, this is our word, virtual event lead or virtual event producer. That's that person that can provide that air traffic control view of all the technology that it takes to kind of tie all those venues together. And and make sure all of that is working together, appropriately. And then, a client pod leader, I think is a great idea as well in terms of keeping everybody on time. So, as a planner, have somebody at every venue that's nominated to kind of keep in touch with each other all the time, and, keep the meeting on schedule. I imagine it's one of the more challenging parts of running a hybrid meeting is going to be to get everybody back from lunch on time, because, hybrid meetings feel more like TV broadcasts will feel like TV broadcasts in some cases, and they have to start on time. So a couple of others on there, but I'll let others chime in too.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, you need that control on the ground as well. Tim, you at your property, your team that would be looking after traditional venue duties now have got maybe slightly different roles, timekeeping, herding people in so that the show can go on is even more critical than live, right? You must have been seeing some of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to Matt's point about redundancies is really important, and going back to the differentiator for multi-pod approach is really that cohesion of collaboration. So, for example, if a laptop goes down in one of the venues, what do we do, right? If the Wi-Fi is not, or the connection's not working, what do we put in place of it so that you can keep the event going, because that's really what's going to keep the unified approach for it. So that's why the collaboration amongst all the different pods and having these roles defined are really important, and will really help you drive success for your event, and think through the redundancies and the backups as needed, to make sure that it goes a seamless process.
And again, thank you, Tim. And again, just another illustration as to the depth of each of these roles. And this is a flow chart that Matt and PSAV have shared with us. But you can see, we will be sharing the slides. We don't have the time to go into each of these, but even if you're using this as a planning card, as stages within your own applications area, or your own event building and planning, it's a great tool to be able to have in front of you and make sure you're asking the right questions to the right people at the right time. Now, this is the one. This is the question we've all been waiting for. Matt, Eric, can you address the cost considerations to help everybody on the call today see the big picture related to staging this type of event? Because it's got to be more expensive, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think yes and no is the answer to that, Mark, and we've tried to illustrate a little bit of that here. It won't come as any surprise to anybody that some of the technology aspects of holding a multi-pod have the potential to be more expensive than the equivalent meeting in a single venue if you got everybody together. Like, after all, like, even before you've added the extra cameras and web conferencing bridges and all of that other stuff, like, you're still talking about 3 sets of projectors, 3 sets of screens, 3 sets of audio reinforcement, and some of those basic needs that we have in the space. Fortunately, with the IAC model, you will find a lot of that equipment already there, which I think is a great a great differentiator that IAC brings to the table around some of these meetings that potentially other brands can't match. We think there's also some interesting trade-offs here, and obviously this is going to depend on the type of organization you are, but potentially lower cost of travel, potentially lower cost of F&B, potentially fewer room nights for those that are attending that are in that drive-to capacity rather than a fly-to capacity. And then some other benefits too, maybe the ability to reach presenters that otherwise wouldn't have been able to attend. So maybe you can get a higher value presenter to attend remotely instead of someone that would be required to fly in. And then obviously the last one, via virtual, the opportunity to extend the reach to a much bigger audience with a very small additional cost on top of a multi-pod type meeting. So 3 things I just want to kind of highlight here around managing costs. For sure, focus on the goals of the meeting, but think about different ways to achieve the same goal. So if your presenters normally ask their audience for feedback by a show of hands, instead of trying to recreate that environment where a presenter can see 4 different live audiences, a cheaper option would be to use an engagement platform that provides real-time feedback to that presenter. And you've reduced massively the complexity of the video production aspect in that space, which is one of the largest cost drivers that you'll see, because it adds the number of mics and cameras and all this kind of stuff that we need. Yep, another good example of thinking about things differently is I think about a collaborative breakout. Like typically we have let's take a typical 50-person breakout. Pre-2020, even in a 50-person breakout, we'd be dividing that group into tables of 10 or so, because we know that much above 10 people, it's hard to drive a collaborative conversation. So we break people down into small groups. So one other tip I think I have around thinking about things differently in a hybrid world would be, it's easy to think about that single 50-person breakout as a single thing in hybrid world, and encourage everyone to think about it more like 5 groups of 10 and less as one group of 50. Next thing here is pre-recorded video, which we call SimuLive, which is a way of pre-recording video to make it look like it's live in the moment. And then of course you can add live Q&A. The same presenter afterwards can do live question and answers if you like. But there's a huge amount of value in doing pre-recorded video. The quality is much higher. It's cheaper to produce, and your presenters are going to go through less stress in the process. So I think 99% of TV is SimuLive at this point. So it's really something that's becoming more and more used in this space. And then yeah.
Matt, do carry on.
Yeah, I was going to mention this this next slide here, Mark. So lots of IACC facilities, like we just talked about, have these technologies built in, which is a great way to help manage the cost. And one aspect we haven't thought about yet is this idea of presentation stages or studio space. And lots of venues, have been building studio space that can help with labor costs. These things are typically less expensive than the equivalent of trucking a bunch of gear in, because they're set and they're up all the time. And I think Ed probably has a story to share with us about doing that in Toronto.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Yeah, I mean, we've been very lucky. One of the greatest advantages the tech team here at Vantage has had is the ability to take pretty much any of these rooms that have been empty, quite detrimental, unfortunately, for the last 6 months, and convert them into full-blown video studios, as you can see from some of those examples that Mark has shared. So yeah, we've been able to get these pre-recorded videos done for clients at a very, very cost effectively, I must say, and it's been great tool.
And Ed, I know particularly that you have done a lot of work around these these event studios within traditional venues, and you've got packaging and prices available on your website. And it's not a promotion for you as a sales sort of promotion for Vantage, but it is an indication of the fact that Vantage gets how to create these environments to pre-record, and you should look to that for any venue that you're looking to work with. If you want to build this, you want to create it, look to see what the credentials are, see if they have got it, if they're on the front foot, because there are many venues out there that aren't, that are still thinking about what it is they want to do, or still trying to sell what we used to buy. So thank you for that. Both Matt and Edward. Now, what I'd like to do, if I may, let's turn our discussions more towards the consideration for the venues that we choose for a multi-pod meeting. I think we were kind of getting there in the last few slides, but it's worth me reminding all of the pledge that every IACC member venue around the world commits to. So, a lot of these standards are already in place. They are already part of the DNA of the venue. So that's a really good starting point. But there's some other considerations as well. Eric, I'm going to turn to you now. Everyone involved in the industry, whether they're venue operators or those evaluating venues, has been asking, how do I assess the space? Whether I've got a virtual site inspection or I can attend in person. Can you talk us through the venue infrastructure that's needed, some of the top tips of what to look out for, and just help us build maybe a different lens that we evaluate spaces on. It's not all about the view now out of the window and some of the old things that used to make a difference. We've got to look for some new stuff now, right?
Yes, thanks, Mark. We do a lot of work with the venues, with venues of all types, whether it's commercial training centers, hotels, conference centers, corporate centers. We work with a lot of different facilities on their technology systems. We design the technology systems that go into these places. And one of the things we always want to do prior to even talking about technology is trying to figure out the environment that they're going to go into. So that's why we say, before we even start with tech, let's look at the lighting in the room, because it's going to impact some of the technology that goes in. And we've been involved with IACC for years. We helped design the IACC's technology standards, and they're designed for great technology. So a lot of this is already kind of baked into these facilities. But we want to, when you're going to any facility and looking at it from an aspect of, can I do a hybrid meeting here, there's a couple things you're going to want to look at, and this is kind of universal, whether no matter where you're going, is to look at the room that you're going to go into and see on the lighting, is the lighting even? Are there hot spots and dark spots in the different areas? Are there windows in the room, and if so, do they have blackout shades? Because when you're doing video, you want to have a very consistent light level. You don't want the light level to continually raise and lower, on a day when maybe there's some clouds coming and going, and sometimes the window's bright and sometimes it's dark, because all of that looks like noise on a video screen. And the more noise there is on a screen, the more bandwidth you need to get your video signal out. So having a nice consistent lighting level, not only gives the people in the room a great view, it does a lot for the people who are looking at it remotely. Because remember, the cameras really are the eyes looking into it. Same goes for acoustics. And when we talk about acoustics, it could be, some people think that's a kind of a scary term, but really all we're talking about is, what does the room sound like? If you stand in the room when it's empty, do you hear the HVAC system? Do you hear the air movement? Do you hear a rattle in the fan? Do you hear the tinkle of chandelier crystals clinking against each other because they're being blown on? Is the room live or is it dead? And by live, we mean, does it echo a lot? Is there a lot of reverberation in the room? Because that creates distraction for the people in the room, but it's very hard on the people who are listening for the microphones, because the humans in the room are able to tune into what they want to hear, where a microphone picks up all that noise and sends it to the remote attendees. So you just basically want to hear, do you hear noise from the service corridor? Do you hear noise from the meeting next door? Just listen to those kind of things, because those are all things that the technology systems, if they're not done well, are going to have to overcome when you put them in the room. There's a picture here of a nice theater and a picture of an auditorium, and we could put the same sound system into both, same quality, same pieces, same everything, but they're going to perform completely differently depending on the environment that they go into. You want to then think about, remember the camera is the eye of the audience. So what does the remote audience need to see? Do they just need to see the presenter? Are they going to need to see the presenter and maybe people asking questions and answers? Is it more collaborative, where they want to see, sometimes they want to see the presenter, sometimes they want to see the presentation, and other times they want to see the room. So all of those things are a consideration as to the type and amount of cameras that will be needed. And then we wanted to look at camera placement just a little bit and make sure that we never want to look up or down at the people on the other space. So the camera angle always wants to be eye level. And remember also, microphones are critical important, because if you're having one of these meetings and the worst happens and you lose your video, as long as people can still hear each other, you can still communicate. But if the audio goes out or they're not able to hear correctly into the room, your meeting's over. That's it. That's done. So, that first picture there in the top left is kind of the scary thing that everybody thinks of, is like, oh my goodness, does everybody need a microphone? And while that is, can be an option in places that can handle that type of thing, there are certainly other options available. Many places might have ceiling microphones built in. You can see there on the right side, there's a beam forming microphone in the ceiling that that can cover an area of the room. There are sound bars that have built-in mic arrays that can handle those types of things, or the very simple conference phone on the desk, which we certainly, unless you're only a few people in the meeting, we don't recommend that. And then we touched on internet just a little bit earlier, but we definitely want to have, we really want to try to have wired connections to run these things. And depending on the wireless for the polling and the audience participation type of stuff, and we want to make sure that we have the bandwidth. And again, there's a great resource on the IAC webpage that will give you this information. Don't think that we're going to run these off the standard Wi-Fi, because you really want to make sure that these go well. And that's and like Matt said, the good news is we're much better positioned now than we would have been 10 years ago to be able to do something like this, because the facilities are really prepared. And especially, just a quick plug for the IAC type facilities, a lot of these places have auditoriums that already have really good systems, camera systems, display systems, microphone systems that are really set up to do these well if those types of rooms fit your meeting design.
Eric, I know you had a huge amount to cover in a very short period of time. As we come up to the hour, you did it so eloquently, as you always do. But to all of my panel, thank you so much for cramming so much detail in there. It's heartening to say that the next steps, if you're thinking about anything like this, is to take a look at iacmeetings.com, go to the MultiPOD section. There is a ton of information there for you that Eric, Matt, Edward and Tim have been working on, along with others that have contributed to this project. And email us if you're looking to put one on anywhere in the world. We're here to help you. We'll connect you with the venues. We'll connect you with the production expertise. We'll even give advice if you are a meeting venue that's looking to create those studio locations or those conference room locations. It's an area that if we're not thinking about it today, or moving beyond the thinking about it into the planning, it's likely to come in the coming weeks and months as we realize that we are adjusting the way we run live events, not just for the next few months, but for the next few years. So thank you for everybody for being a part of this. Thank you as well for the chat, for the questions, and for our panelists picking up in between sessions and answering those. But we appreciate you being part of this IAC production and webinar today on MultiPOD. Wish you all the best in your event planning. And thank you finally to our audience. And again, once more to our panel. Awesome job. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.